Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to A Life Less Traveled. I'm your host, Michael Wentink. I'm 40 years old and live in San Antonio, Texas with my wife and two beautiful children. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis about 10 years ago, and I write about my journey of living with MS, and you can check out my stories on my website at mjwentink.com. Again, that's mjwentink.com. I share some of my writings with the National MS Society, and they post them up on their blog at themsconnection.org, or you can also find them at themighty.com. If you happen to be on Twitter, you can look me up there at mjwentink. Again, that's at mjwentink. Please feel free to shoot me a tweet. I'd absolutely love to connect. Today, on the fourth episode of A Life Less Traveled, we're going to be discussing my journey to diagnosis, part 3, the final part. In the previous two parts, we discussed how it was a 10-year process, all in, of learning that I had multiple sclerosis. Along the way, I had many fears that maybe it was something else. Maybe I was tested for cancer, tumors, every exact disease that you could think of. Maybe it was nothing, and it was all in my head. It was a difficult process, and it all came, things really were set in motion when my friends Mark and Melissa came and visited in July of 2007. One of the nights that they were visiting, I ended up going to the emergency room because of a stomach pain I had. And I know, it's like, I had a tummy ache, but I was on the ground, and I felt like I was having a stroke or a heart attack because I was having pains in my arm. So when I say stomach pain, it was basically the entire left side of my body. It felt like it was just in so much pain. So, and I had had stomach pains before, not to this extent, but I'd been having a lot of problems after eating food and having issues that I wasn't sure why I was having it. And doctors hadn't determined at that point why I may or may not have been having it. While I was in the emergency room, the emergency room doctor, he thought that maybe I had ulcerative colitis. And not long after that, I met with a GI doctor, a gastrointestinal doctor, and he thought perhaps it was Crohn's disease. And he started giving me, over the next couple months, I had a lot of tests, and he didn't decidedly determine that it was Crohn's disease, but he thought that maybe that was the best direction to go in, and that's what I started being treated for, was Crohn's disease. So I was being treated for Crohn's disease, and this was maybe in the winter, so we're talking about 4 or 5 months later, and I was out running in my neighborhood. Well, as I was running in my neighborhood, my leg gave out. And this happened multiple times. And, I'd had issues with my balance, falling downstairs, falling upstairs, even when I was on the basketball court, just falling down for no reason. I couldn't figure it out. But this seemed different to me. The other ones, I felt like, maybe I wasn't getting enough sleep. Maybe I was just clumsy. Something was going on. But there's this involuntary, reflex that I was having. Like I couldn't control what was happening with my leg. So then maybe a few weeks later, I started having issues with my vision. And, looking back, it was optic neuritis. At the time, I didn't know what optic neuritis was. All I knew is that it hurt. My face hurt. It hurt to look out of my eyes and my peripheral vision. A lot of my vision, at some points, it was really hard to even see. If it was not blurry, it was hard to see out of my eyes. It was a very, difficult time. And when I went and talked with my GI doctor, I was just like, I don't think, this doesn't seem like this would be Crohn's. Something's going on here. And he agreed with me. And so he, wrote up the second opinion. And where I had left off, we were on a plane headed to the Mayo Clinic. My wife and I were flying up to Rochester, Minnesota. I have here the letter from my GI doctor. I always, hold on to a lot of these things, but I just wanted to summarize, or just the first and the final paragraph that he had written, so you can understand my mind frame as we're flying up to the Mayo Clinic. Mr. Wentink is a pleasant 31-year-old gentleman who I originally saw in July of 2007. The patient at the time was hospitalized with symptoms of fever, nausea, vomiting, and left-sided abdominal pain. The patient at the time reported a 6 to 8 year history of a lot of these same issues. At the end, he had written, "Overall, I'm unclear to Mr. Wentink's diagnosis. I think he has an undiagnosed inflammatory process that may involve his eye and his gut. Crohn's disease remains a possibility, although I have no definitive pathological diagnosis. I'm somewhat reluctant to increase his strength of immunosuppressive agents, given the uncertainty of his diagnosis. Given the patient's age and his chronicity of his symptoms, the patient requests a second opinion, which I am in favor of. Any help would be greatly appreciated." So, there was a lot of words in between the first and last paragraph that I wrote to you there. A lot of medical words which I didn't fully understand and grasp. And I really, even within those two paragraphs I read to you, I didn't necessarily understand everything at the time or even now. But I knew as I was flying up to Rochester, Minnesota, that, the GI doctor that had been looking at me, he wasn't thinking that it was probably Crohn's either, that this was probably going to be going into another direction. My hope was that I was just finally going to get an answer. So we flew into Minneapolis, and my wife and I, then we drove up to Rochester, Minnesota, and we arrived there, and it's a beautiful town. It's you go into restaurants, and you're given popcorn at it felt like at every restaurant we were going to, they were giving us popcorn. In San Antonio, you go into a restaurant, they're going to give you chips. That's kind of maybe just the culture here. Well, there you're getting popcorn, and it seemed great. And there was walleye on every menu. I'd never even really heard of walleye before, but I was like, well, I guess I got to get walleye because it was on every menu. I remember there was one place near our hotel that we went to. It was kind of like a bar/grill kind of place. And they had this spinning wheel there. It was the spinning wheel of drinks, where if you want to, you say to the bartender, hey, you spin the wheel, and whatever it comes up, it's some kind of shot or concoction of drinks, however it, whatever it lands on, that's what I'm going to have. I never, had them spin the wheel, but I remember thinking while I was there, I was like, for me, it'd been feeling like a spinning wheel of diagnoses, where it's just like, spin the wheel, where is it going to land? I didn't know. we flew up on a Monday, and I was tested there at the Mayo Clinic from Tuesday through Friday, that first week there. And, the Mayo Clinic, they're very, very efficient with the way that everything's up. Is like each day I had my own little agenda of, the offices to go to where they're going to be pulling blood and all the different kind of things that they had. But, I had, it was like by the hour, it's like, and you show up to these appointments and it's like, you're not waiting. Like everything for the most part runs right on time and everything was done. I remember immediately being impressed with that and thinking maybe I am going to get a answer here. Well, I had met with the head GI doctor at the Mayo Clinic. That was one of the first things that we did on that Tuesday. And I still remember what she said to me. We sat down and it was the first thing she said to me. She looked at me right in the eyes and was just like, "Do you think you have Crohn's disease?" And my honest, immediate answer was like, "No." And she responded, "I don't think you do either, but we're gonna figure things out." So she had, as I said, I had a schedule of a bunch of tests, the blood tests and everything, and an MRI. I had an MRI scheduled. Now, I'd never had an MRI before. I'd had many, many CAT scans, but no MRIs. Along the way, I also had a test for my stomach where they gave me, it was one morning, they gave me a breakfast. You go in and it's like, scrambled eggs. I can't remember if there may have been some toast, but it's like scrambled eggs. But the interesting thing about this breakfast is that it was radioactive. So it was this nuclear breakfast that I was eating. And then what they were doing is that then they would be scanning my stomach after I ate this nuclear breakfast, these eggs that were radioactive. They would scan my stomach and track it as it went through my digestive system. And maybe they were scanning it every 15 minutes or half hour. I can't remember now, but I was staying there for like a good part of the day, I feel like, as they were scanning it as it went through my system. Well, I went in, then had the MRI, and that was my first experience. I'd had a lot of scans, but the MRI, it was different for me because they put you in this, skinny little tube, and I was having an MRI done on my brain, my spine, and my shoulders, I believe. And, I'm just in this skinny little tube and needing to lay still, which is much easier said than done. I mean, I am a very fidgety person, so maybe other folks are do a little better with that, but I'm very fidgety. And it's like I feel like I'm constantly itching and needing to scratch myself. And I remember being in this tube. I was wearing these headphones. I can't remember if they were playing music or not, but I know that the technician would constantly be speaking into the headphones saying, you have to stay still. And I just wanted to scream out, "I'm trying." But, because they would do these scans, and this machine, these noises that I was hearing, it was the loudest. It was just like these excruciating noises that were screaming out at me, and I needed to stay still in this tiny little skinny little tube and not move around. And it's like, "Mr. One Tank, we need you to stay still. We're going to have to do this again because you were moving." Or maybe I was scratching my head or whatnot. It was my first MRI was a very, I'm sure they didn't view me. My GI doctor may have thought I was a pleasant 31-year-old, but I don't know if the technician at the Mayo Clinic was thinking that because of the amount of times that I was moving around, and the MRI probably ended up taking much longer than it should have. So I had that stuff done, and eventually I met back with my the GI doctor there, and she told me that, well, I don't know if it was that she really told me. She alerted me to the fact that I had lesions on my brain and spine, and lesions that she said were most likely indicative of multiple sclerosis. So she scheduled for me a lumbar puncture or a spinal tap, and I was going to have it there on that Friday. So I was like, okay, it wasn't guaranteed that it was MS. It was a thought, but they had to do a lot more tests. They wanted to rule out a lot of other things as well. And so I was like, okay, well, I was going to go in for the spinal tap. And I remember, talking to my wife the night before, telling her just how brutal that MRI was and how tough it was to lay there still. I felt like it just took hours and hours, and it probably did. My regular MRI that I have now is maybe about an hour and a half. And that one was probably at least 2 hours, maybe even 2.5 hours, just because the amount of movements that I was having. Well, so I was telling my wife that was the worst ever. And then the next day I went and got a spinal tap. And well, I had a new worst ever procedure done, because that, to this day, the spinal tap was the toughest medical procedure that I've ever had. I feel like I've blocked a lot of it out just because it was so painful, but just so you understand, they're extracting spinal fluids from your back, obviously, and so they're sticking this needle and extracting this stuff, and I just felt like it was never going to stop. It was never going to end. It was brutal, to say the least. Well, and that was done on a Friday. My wife and I at the time, we'd gotten a flight up, and we didn't know how long we were going to be there at the Mayo Clinic for. And we weren't really expecting to stay longer than Friday, but we had already spoken with the airlines ahead of time, so they knew that we were going to need to maybe extend our flight. So we were like, okay, it's the weekend now. We're going to come back on Monday for some more tests, and I was going to be going to the neurology area there at the Mayo Clinic. So we decided, okay, well, let's drive back to Minneapolis, and we can hang out in Minneapolis. My aunt and uncle, as it turns out, live in Minneapolis. So, what a great opportunity. We can kind of hang out with family and be with them. So that's exactly what we did. We checked out of our hotel there in Rochester and headed back to Minneapolis. And that night we had dinner with my aunt and uncle. And then my uncle was like, hey, how about we go fishing tomorrow? I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Now, remember, I still had the thoughts ringing in my head where when they did the spinal tap, they had mentioned to me that, drink lots of fluids and in your backs, you're probably going to be in some pain. So, I don't know, if you want to be doing anything strenuous or moving around a lot, but you're probably going to be in some pain. But I just remember thinking in that moment, I was like, well, I don't want, I want to continue living my life. And it's like I had to kind of set that, early within this. If I have MS or if I have something else, I want to continue to be able to do things. And plus, honestly, I needed to clear my head. I mean, the Mayo Clinic is a beautiful place, but I mean, I'd still been being tested for Tuesday through Friday. I needed a break. So fishing sounded wonderful. And my wife spent the day. She went to the Mall of America there in Minneapolis. She ended up getting lost in this mall, which, I mean, I'm sure she didn't mind because it's just like this humongous mall. And my uncle, he drove me out to Wisconsin, and we went bass fishing out there. It was just this beautiful area, and it was the exact opposite of being in a doctor's office. It was exactly what I needed. Yes, I was in excruciating pain. It was difficult. I remember, at many moments just feeling like I wanted to give up. My uncle had some whiskey with him, so maybe that helped, but I decided just kind of push through and not give up. And I'm glad, because that was just one of those magical experiences that you have in life. I'm here in this beautiful place in Wisconsin. I'm standing in this water knee deep, wearing these clothes to keep the water from getting on. There are these camouflage waders, which is, I mean, it was a great thing because I love fishing, but honestly I hadn't done it a whole lot in my life, even though I enjoy doing it. But it was the kind of thing that I needed to do to take my mind off of everything that was happening. So that Monday, we probably Sunday night, we drove back up to Rochester, And then that Monday, we returned to the Mayo Clinic. And I had some more tests that were done. And then on that Tuesday, May 13th, 2008, that was when I received my diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. I still remember meeting with the neurologist, sitting in there with him. I'm sitting next to my wife, hearing these words that I have MS. And, one of the first thoughts I had is like, well, what does this mean? I was semi-prepared for it because I kind of was thinking that maybe it was this, but it's like, what does this mean for like my future, for my life? And, he gave, it was a very honest answer where he said, what we don't know about MS far outweighs what we do know. I could go the next 30 years and be fine, or I could wake up the next day and be in a wheelchair. And, that pause there was intended because that's that moment that I had where I was like, oh, okay. I mean, how am I supposed to process this? He also shared with me that based on the nuclear breakfast I had, they determined that I process food faster than about 99% of the population, the general population. Maybe it was 95%, 95 or 99%, whatever the answer is. I process food extremely fast, and that's why I was having the issues that I was having. It was unrelated to MS, really. They actually wanted me to stay there for more testing, to be part of some study they wanted to do on me, and I was just like, I need to get home. I miss home. I can't do tests anymore. While we were away, our son, he had taken steps, before, but it was always kind of steps where he was being, guided by us, or we're holding his hands and stuff like that. But while we were away, we learned, my parents were in relatively constant contact with us, and they let us know that our son Vincent, he took his first steps by himself. And that was, it was beautiful to hear, but it was painful, and as I was on that plane, flight home, I remember thinking, I don't want MS to cause me to miss things like that again. So I was happy I had an answer and I can close that chapter in my life. And, looking back now, MS is obviously going to cause me to miss things, because that's how the disease works. But, I'm going to do everything that I can to not miss the most important things that are out there. That's the way that I want to always be living. And I also, thought about I don't want to run away from MS. I was going to be upfront with people about it. At work, I wasn't going to throw it in people's faces. There's, HIPAA rules and stuff like that. But, I certainly wasn't going to lie about it. And, I was in a fortunate position at my job where, I was in a great group and they worked with me. They were really awesome about it. I let, my manager knew and my, my VP knew at the time. They let me work from home 3 days a week. And, I was in a position that required a lot of face time, but they were, so flexible with everything. And, it was awesome of them. And so, as I said, it's like, it's not the same for everyone. Maybe some people feel like they're not able to share with their managers, and I understand that. And I wanted to just be open and honest with my friends and family. But I also understand that a lot of people, they don't want to share it with others. There's some people that they don't even tell some of their closest family members, and, to each their own. I can understand their situation and how, they wouldn't want to share things, but I just wanted to almost just quickly tear the Band-Aid off and kind of just get it out there. With a lot of my close family and friends, I called them and I shared with them to let them know, it's like I finally had an answer, or if some of them didn't even know I was going through medical issues, just to be like, hey, just want to let you know, this is what's going on. I'm going to be fine, etc. At that time, I still needed to learn about MS. I'd even picked up an MS for Dummies book on the way back from Rochester. But with a lot of my other friends and family, I was thinking, I didn't want to share the same conversation, 100 different times. I felt like maybe it would just sound like a canned conversation after a while. Hey, how are you? Oh, I'm well. How's the weather? Oh, it's good. By the way, I have MS, and here are the different things that you need to know about it. It's like that just, it wasn't me. It didn't seem real. So the solution in my head at the time was, you know what? I'm going to write about it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write and kind of post it for like a lot of my family and friends so they can just see it. And I was going to call it like a health update. This is what's going on. I was diagnosed with MS. And, little did I know at that time, when I started writing about it, was that, this was going to become my future of what I do now, writing and talking about living with MS. I started doing it and sharing my story, and, the way that people reacted to it in my writing, I didn't know that my writing had that impact on folks. I never even really written, I'd written at work, business papers and, PowerPoints. I mean, yeah, I did that stuff a lot. But the last time I wrote like an actual paper would have been in college or something like that. But, if you think about it, this, as it turned out in my life, it was the first of many silver linings on my life less traveled. I hope you enjoyed part 3, the final part of my journey to diagnosis. If you want to check out any of my writings and my stories, they're on my website at mjwentink.com. Again, that's mjwentink.com. You can also find me on Twitter at mjwentink. And I hope you check out my future broadcast, which will be centering on many of these silver linings that are brought about from living with MS. Silver linings are always there. Sometimes you just need to look and find them. Thank you, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Goodbye.